Hi friends! Glad to see you and excited to create again with you this week. We are continuing our study of famous artists, and we're going to go back to somebody that we have mentioned in the past, somebody that I know you know the name of, and you might find some of his work familiar. I'm going to show you some of his famous pieces and see if you can guess who I'm talking about. Did you guess his name? Do you remember it? I'll give you a hint. It sounds like the name of a car. His name was Van Gogh, Vincent van Gogh, and he was a Dutch painter who was famous for his bold brush strokes and for the number of paintings that he created, over 2,000 in a very short career. You probably recognized Starry Night the most. We've done some art in that style before. And today we're going to be inspired by another one of his pieces. Not a landscape, but a still life. Do you remember what a still life is? A still life is where you set things up and they hold still and you draw or paint them. And Van Gogh did a lot of still lifes, but mostly still lifes of flowers. And with all that is blooming right now, I thought it was appropriate that we create a still life of flowers as well. But before you back away and go, I'm not going to create flowers, that's lame, we're going to do it in a totally crazy way today. So first, let's take a look at Van Gogh's flowers so we can just get an idea of where inspiration comes from. And then I'm going to tell you how we're going to create today. Here is what I created to go with today's lesson, inspired by Van Gogh's flowers. And you might look at that and say, Mrs. Burke, that kind of looks a little messy and a little crazy. And it is. Because honestly, Van Gogh's life was a little bit messy and a little bit crazy. And here's how I created this. I used crayons, and I used watercolor, and I used both of my hands at the same time. So we're going to do an exercise today where we draw with both hands at the same time. So it's going to get a little messy. It's going to get a little bit crazy. We're not going for perfection. We're going for fun and for the experience today. So grab your crayons, grab your watercolors and brush and a little bit of water, get a piece of paper, and you might need a piece of tape or a heavy book to hold your paper down because we're going to be doing a lot of moving while we're painting today. And let's create a still life of flowers together. Here's the piece that I created, inspired by Van Gogh's sunflowers. I created it without a pencil or an eraser. I just wanted to play. And I used both hands at the same time. So we're going to get a little bit crazy. We're going to be drawing at the same time. And this isn't so much about making perfect art, but about challenging our brains and our bodies to try something new and laughing at ourselves in the process. I did a couple of versions. I did the first version more with the same color palette that Van Gogh chose for his. Yellow sunflowers, a yellow and kind of turquoisey vase, a light turquoise background, and a brown table. But then I thought I wanted to have even more fun, and so my second piece, I just went crazy. And so you really can choose whatever colors that you want. We're going to start off by creating the centers of our flowers. We might even do a flower that is facing to the side. A lot of Van Gogh's flowers were facing downward or facing to the side. And then we're going to do our petals, followed by our stems, our leaves, our pot or our vase, and our table. We're going to do all of our drawing in crayon, and then we're going to fill in our colors using watercolor paint. So grab yourself a piece of blank paper and get 2 crayons. Now, if you want to, you can choose any crayons you want, but let's pick whatever 2 crayons you want for the center of your flowers. I like to dump my crayons out so I can see my assortment of colors. If you like to keep yours in your box, I understand. I'm going to choose, I think, a blue and a purple for the center of my flowers. Now I'm going to hold one in each hand, and this might be super silly and it might make you laugh, and you might think that it looks like a disaster, and that's perfectly fine. So I'm going to start, and I'm just going to imagine I'm going to do 3 flowers, and I'm going to use my invisible drawing tool and imagine that the center of the first flower is right here. So I'm going to take my 2 crayons, and at the same time I'm just going to kind of create a wiggly circle like that, kind of a scribble. Then I'm going to switch hands, and I'm going to do the same thing. So where I had blue on this side, I'm now going to have purple. Where I had purple on this side, I'm now going to have blue. So, and you'll find that one hand is a lot harder than the other to create with. So there's the center of one flower. I'm going to make another flower over here and another flower over here using that same process. So my blue, oh, you know what? Mrs. Burke has paint on my crayon. So I'm going to scrape that off a little bit. All right, so I'm just making a scribbly mess right here, flipping my colors around, now doing the same thing. Is that a perfect circle? Nope, just a squiggly mess. And I'm going to do one more over here. I think for this painting, I'm going to do all 3 of them just wide open like that. So start off like that, squibbly mess, and then switch hands. All right. I hope that you pick 2 fun colors and make yourself 3 scribbly messes. If you need to pause the video to make yourself 3 flowers or 3 flower centers, go ahead and do that. As you do it, it's perfectly fine. You'll see there's lots of white space in between my scribbly lines. I didn't totally color them in. And the reason for that is that later I'm going to put some watercolor on top of my crayon, and because because crayon resists watercolor, the watercolor will fill in some of those white places. All right, now that you have your 3 centers, now comes the craziness. I am going to paint, or I'm going to choose, I think, a red and an orange. Yeah, I'll choose a red and an orange to do my flower petals. Now watch this crazy action. I'm going to start at the top, and using both hands at the same time, I'm going to come up and I'm going to start making some flower petals. And you might find at first that this feels so weird. For some of you, it might be really easy. For others of you, it may just look like a big scribbly mess, and that's perfectly fine. I'm going to switch my hand again so that I get both red and orange on both sides. And I'm just going to come back and do another layer of petals like this. Now look at that giant one. It's okay. They're going to be crazy, and that's just fine. I'm going to do the same thing over here and the same thing over here, and you can do it along with me. Just see if you can be drawing them at the same time. Now notice my paper started to move a little bit. If that happens to you a lot, you can put a piece of tape on your paper and tape it to your surface, or you can put a heavy book on your paper to kind of hold it in one place. Or you can just be like me and deal with it and have some wonky looking petals. Switching hands. Going back again. Making some big, crazy, colorful petals. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Wiggling, wiggling, wiggling. Ooh, this side is really crazy. Switching hands. You should end up with 3 big, wiggly, messy looking flowers. Now I'm gonna move on to, I think I'll do my vase next. So for my vase, I think I'm gonna pick blue, maybe a magenta and an orange. They might look very similar to my flowers, and that's okay. I'm gonna start with them touching beneath my middle flower, and I'm just gonna draw a line out. Switch hands, draw a line out again. We might even cross them. It doesn't really matter. We just want kind of a straight line. And then I'm gonna do a curve down and a flat bottom. Switch hands again. Remember, we're not caring about perfection. We're just having fun experimenting with both sides of our brain. I might draw a line and a line. You can tell that Mrs. Burke is right-handed. Look how nice and straight my first line was and how crazy wiggly my second line was. And then I'm gonna draw the line for my background. I think I'll use a gray and a blue for this one. And I'm gonna start on either edge of my pot and just go out, switch hands again, and go out. What this does is that gives us a place for the wall and a place for the table. And then I'm gonna draw my stems and my leaves. I'm gonna use 2 different colors of green, and I'm gonna start on this side, and remember I'm drawing at the same time, and I'm gonna go this way, top to bottom on that stem. Switch hands, and go back over those lines. Then you can have some fun making the leaves. Wiggle them out like that. You can even add a little line up the middle. Switch hands, do it again. You can make any kind of leaves you want on the outside of your stems. Maybe a little one on this side. Switch hands again. And there's going to be some overlapping over here, which is fun. Remember, not going for perfection. You should be laughing at yourself. If you get frustrated with yourself, take a break, shake your hands, laugh. Remember that Mrs. Burke has a little bit more practice doing this, and so mine might look way fancier than yours. Well, go ahead and get caught up. Get your pictures drawn. If you loved this process and you want to add more and more and more flowers, you can add as many as you want. But I'm going to stop at 3 and get my watercolors ready, and then we'll paint together. All right, now it's time to add paint to our painting, or to our Van Gogh floral still life. And we're going to use our watercolors today. We're going to work with our watercolors like we always do, from light to dark. And so I'm going to choose to paint my flowers yellow because I want to make them like the sunflowers in Van Gogh's painting. But you may choose a totally different color. If you decide that you want to make your flowers all different colors or your petals different colors, it's really up to you. I'm going to go ahead and just use that yellow. We don't want our paint to be too soupy, so if you have puddles like I'm having here, I might kind of drag some of the paint from those puddles into the other petals. And you guys might hear my kids in the background. They're being loud outside, but I'm glad they're playing outside. So I'm just going to go ahead and paint these yellow, and you can paint your petals any color you want. Now I'm finished painting my petals. Notice I wasn't perfect. I didn't have to totally stay in the lines. I just wanted to get the idea of yellow sunflower petals bursting out of these centers. And I didn't put any paint in the centers. And I did that on purpose because I'm gonna let my yellow paint dry a little bit and then go back and add some dark paint in my centers. I'm just noticing something, and you might notice it too. So I filmed the whole art video, and this section of the video didn't record for some reason. And so I had to redraw my picture, and I'm recognizing that when I did my centers, I didn't switch my crayons. So hang on, just so that it looks right at the end. I'm going back and just switching my crayons around to fill those centers just a tiny bit. Okay, next thing I'm gonna paint, I am gonna go ahead and I'm gonna paint my stems and my leaves. I'm gonna use green. You can use whatever you want. We have two different colors of green in our watercolors. We have this lighter yellowy green and this darker bluey green, whatever you wanna use. The fun thing when we add paint on top of these crayons is the way that those colors resist and shine through. So when I'm painting on top of that light lemony yellow green, I'm seeing it through my green watercolors. And remember, with watercolors, we usually try to paint light to dark. That means we put a light color on first, and then if we want it to be more colorful or we want it to be darker, we can add that later. And so right now I'm just going with this really nice kind of light green, and I may decide to add a little bit more of that darker green later. But for right now, this looks just about right. I'm gonna go ahead and paint my vase, and I'm gonna do, I don't know, some fun colors. I might do the top part blue. I think I'm gonna do the bottom part red. But you may choose to add more design to your vase if you wanted to add more crayons. Or you might choose to paint stripes or polka dots. It's really up to you. Remember, this is your masterpiece. But I'm going to go with the Van Gogh inspiration where he had one color on the top and a different color on the bottom. You can tell I've still got some blue on my brush because when I add that red, kind of coming out like a violet. And notice when I start running out of paint, if you start getting those brush strokes, that means you might need to get a little bit more paint on your brush, or drag it from a different part of that section that you're painting. Notice too that I'm keeping my brush so that the tip looks like the pointed toe of a ballerina. We don't want our brushes to ever look like that. You might go, ooh, that actually looks cool, Mrs. Burke, but that ruins our brushes. If you want to make a texture in your paint, you can, but use a piece of tissue or something to do that. The next section we're going to paint is our table. I'm going to just paint mine regular old brown. I'm going to paint it like it's a wooden tabletop, and I'm going to go back and forth. Once again, you could paint yours to look like there's a tablecloth, like it's on a painted table. You can paint it stripes, you can paint it polka dots, you can paint it zigzag, you can paint it curlicues or swirls. You can paint it however you want. I'm just painting right up against that. Now notice here my brush is starting to get a little dry, so I can drag some paint from those wetter spots, or I can dip in and get it just a little bit more. I kind of like how the water, for some reason on this piece of paper today, the paint's not really sitting, but I think it looks really neat. And then I'm going to do my background. I'm going to do my background on this one purple. And the reason for that is that purple and yellow are what are considered complementary colors. That means that they are across from one another on the color wheel. And it means that when they're next to each other in a painting, that they make the other one look even brighter, even more bold. So we get contrast that way. And remember, we get contrast when we have a light color next to a dark color, or when we have a warm color next to a cool color, or when we have complementary colors next to each other. So right now I have all sorts of contrast going on in my painting. I have a cool dark center next to a light warm petal. So that's, we get a kind of a light dark contrast there. And then I have the complementary color contrast happening here with my purple background and my yellow foreground. We also have contrast of texture because our crayon lines are kind of crazy and probably a little bit bumpy, and there's a lot of movement in it. The way that I'm choosing to apply my watercolor, there's some contrast here because I'm applying my watercolor in very smooth strokes, in very linear strokes. So I'm applying smooth, clean lines with my watercolor here. And so that kind of provides a neat contrast with our wiggly crayon lines. Now when I get in these little spaces under here, sometimes you might get a splash of paint where you don't think you want it. You can dab it up with a Kleenex or a piece of toilet paper or paper towel. It's awfully dark. It doesn't really matter. I might get a little paint off my brush here and get in some of these. You want to make sure you get all of that little background space, even the space between the leaves and the petals. A good thing we didn't try to paint with both hands. That would be a fun experiment to try, wouldn't it? All right, I'm going to keep painting my background, and I'm going to go, sometimes I'll go around my painting and then draw my lines. There's really not a right or wrong way to do this today. We just want to fill it in and get lots of color on our paper. So go ahead, paint your painting, paint your background, paint along with me, and then we'll talk again before we paint the centers. All right, our background is done. Let's go ahead and do our centers. So most of the paint around here, I'm going to even just use my finger to move some of that paint away. The reason I'm doing that is that I want to put a pretty dark color in my center, but if there's wet paint touching it, watercolor will move wherever there's water. And so I want it to be nice and dry. I like to have a really nice contrast. Just like sunflowers have a really nice contrast. They have that really dark center with those really bright petals. So I'm putting my brush in a lot of black paint, not very much water, and I'm just going to come back and dab right on top of my center here. And my paint will sit in any of the places where I don't have crayon already. There's a lot of places on this one. But I think that's, if you look at the center of a sunflower, they have all those bumps and seeds, lots and lots and lots of texture, So we're getting even some more contrast here because we're getting this dark textured center right next to our bright, smooth leaves. You don't have to do a black center. You can do a red or purple or blue, whatever color you want. It's up to you. But I kind of like that contrast. All right, now that I've got that done, that seems to want to puddle there. That's okay. Now that we've got kind of our first layer of watercolor down, you can always add more color with watercolor. So let's say I want my yellow petals to be even more yellow. I can come back and add more yellow on top. Or let's say that I want to have it be a little bit darker around the middle here. I might go back and add some orange or even some red around the centers of my flowers. You can always add darker colors on top of lighter colors in watercolor, but you can't add lighter colors on top of darker colors. Let's see if we can I can show you how that doesn't really work. So if I wanted to add, it just doesn't look good. You'll get kind of mud. So if I decided I wanted to add, if I wanted to make something lighter by adding a color that I thought was lighter, let's say I tried to add this yellow on top of that blue, it's not going to make a lighter color, it's just going to blend and make a green. Now that might be a fun experiment, but it's not gonna do what you think that you want it to do. I'll go back and cover that with a little bit of blue, but that's there. We'll just kind of swoosh that back in. And I'm going to add a little bit more red down here. Again, I probably didn't rinse my brush very well. Mrs. Burke sometimes does that. Get a little bit more red down here. And I kind of liked that darker look around the middle of my sunflowers. And maybe a little bit more intense yellow on some of my petals. I don't have to do it on all of them. Maybe a little bit of orange coming up the middles. It's kind of fun with a paintbrush like this because the shape of the paintbrush is almost like a petal. So all you have to do is really draw it in that line and you get that petal shape. All right, there we go. There's our finished piece. So I did this project 3 different times and ended up with 3 different kinds of paintings. The first one was this, pretty similar to, well, not similar, but same colors as Van Gogh's original painting. And then I got a little spicier and I used some of those different colors to make a more vibrant painting. And then today, as I painted with you, I went even more crazy with the color. And I created this multicolored painting. But each time I did it, I used that same funny technique. How did that make you feel? Was that fun? Were you surprised that you could use both hands? Was it hard for you? No matter how it was, I hope that you just were able to relax and play and laugh and then put a lot of color on your paper and have a lot of fun. I sure wish that I could see your artwork, and I sure wish we could draw together in person. But for now, I'm thankful that we get to draw together even when we're apart.